Welcome back, everybody. This is not the Malazan video. This is me talking about The Return of the King. Because I just finished it like 5 minutes ago. I had planned to finish it earlier, but then I got distracted by a video conference and having a barbecue and annoying my neighbors by playing a lot of Virgin Steel because they don't know what's good for them. Anyway, so, no, I'm done. I figure I'll just, ramble a bit about my thoughts on the last part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and after that, I'll go back to annoying my neighbors by playing too much Virgin Steel because how much is better than like 90s Virgin Steel? Anyway, let's get this started. Cheers. So once again, this is sort of like a full spoiler discussion. I'm not going to go too deeply into the plot because I figure at this point you know how this story goes, right? The ring ends up in the volcano and that's it. So I'm just going to, pick out a few things that I, came to mind, like that I really liked about it this time, or that I feel are important to talk about. Not too much about the plot itself because, I figured everyone knows it by now. Anyway, so there's a bunch of things that I want to talk about. I definitely want to talk about Eowyn because she needs to be talked about. I'm going to talk about the Scouring of the Shire. I want to talk about the end of it all and about the idea of a golden age and a new golden age, or the idea of that. So let's get started. Eowyn, probably my favorite, or one of my favorite characters in the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. She's absolutely fascinating because for someone who is like, Tolkien is not exactly known for writing a lot of like compelling female characters. In the entirety of the Hobbit, there's no single female character that has a speaking role. There's like no one, which is pretty fucking brutal when you come to think about it. But the Lord of the Rings doesn't have that many like important female characters. There's basically two and a half. That half being Arwen, which says like two sentences or maybe three in the entirety of the book, and the two others being Galadriel and Eowyn. And while there is certainly enough to be said about Galadriel, who is probably one of the most powerful characters in the entire world, it's not exactly something that comes across in the story. And Eowyn, being human, and the struggles around her are so much closer to like real life, relatable, like human struggles. Her like general struggle for recognition, for equality, and having the same rights and duties as a man is something that I feels like, I mean, unfortunately, gender equality is still not a thing. But when Tolkien wrote that book in like the 1940s, it was so far away, and to have a female character yearning to be recognized or be valued as much as like the male characters of the male as the men in her society is certainly one thing. The other part is like you have that point when she says like what she fears is to be caged, which is something that's always spoken to me. It's like the idea of to being caged in like expectations of society is, as I said, it's, I feel for her. The other interesting thing is like where I struggle with Eowyn as a character is the ending of her arc, right? So the point that she falls in love with Aragorn, And she doesn't fall in love with him because of his personality, but because of his role, because what she wants is actually fame and all of that, and recognition within a warrior society that's built on like battle fame and stuff like that. Shows that she's still sort of part of that society that she comes from. And that moment where she kind of falls in love or whatever with Faramir and decides to still, end in a classic, like a traditional female role, is the thing that always makes it feel slightly bitter for me, because it's like Tolkien was so close. It was so fucking close, and then he still like ends it like this. But maybe I'm reading it wrong. I'm just saying, like, that's one of the things that I always felt, there was so much more potential there. But that scene in Dunharrow when she's like talking to Aragorn and wants to go with him on the paths of the dead, and it's like, what do you fear? And she's like, to be caged. Like, I get it. I so fucking get it. And I'm not even a woman, right? But that's the point. It's like, to recognize that society puts us into roles that we don't want to fill because they're just like stupid fucking expectations from outside. Makes Eowyn such a believable character, and that whole scene, the charge at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, and when they just go in there and she kills the Nazgul, and like the level of epicness that Tolkien actually reaches there is incredible. I feel that's probably the highlight of the entire book, maybe the entire series, because that whole battle in front of the Black Gate isn't that spectacular, but that scene with the Rohirrim's like charging, the Rohirrim charging on the field and all that, that's just like. And this brings me to like another thing that I wanted to talk about. Well, I realized once again when reading this, and it comes like it really hits you really powerfully in that last book, is how well organized, how well structured, and how well like tied up a story the Lord of the Rings is. It's like, yeah, we've spoken about this before. It's like inspired by mythology. It takes a lot of stuff from like legends and mythology, but the level the level of tying up like loose threads is like how everything that was ever said in this book, how every like slightly prophetic saying, how all of those things in the end are just tied back into like that story. That is just like incredible. It's like I'm not saying I want that in all of my stories. Actually, that's far from it. It's like I do appreciate in a lot of fantasy stories and a lot of like in literature in general to have like loose ends, right? Depending what kind of story you want to tell, having loose ends is exactly what you want. But the level of tying off loose ends that the Lord of the Rings does all the way up to the end. It's like even like to the point where the pony shows up again, and Sam is happy. And then when they find Bill Ferny being the gatekeeper, and Bill Ferny runs away, and Bill the pony kicks it, like that is a level of just like all over being like that's a level of closure that I've rarely seen anywhere else that the Lord of the Rings actually achieves. And that's something that as I said, it's not something that I want in all of my fantasy stories, far from it. I'm just saying that for that, semi-mythological level that the Lord of the Rings has at this point, and that it's inspired by that all those mythologies and legends and like oral stories and all of that. It does that whole closure thing so damn well. It's like if I read that in like a modern fantasy story, I would probably go and complain because it's unrealistic. Of course, it's unrealistic. The Lord of the Rings is not aiming to be a realistic story. It's a mythology. It's a legend. It talks about ideal characters doing ideal things and stuff like that. So having all these things coming to a closure just fits in with the entire theme and the entire atmosphere of the story. And like reading it this time around, I just like was impressed by how incredibly well Tolkien manages to actually fit all these things that happen in there. I mean, it kind of follows from the way he's writing. There's not that much, just everyday kind of conversation and stuff like that could go anywhere. It's like the way, how can I say that? Like the entire story and the entire writing doesn't feel so much like writing a story. It feels more like composing a piece of music, of classical music, basically. It's like every theme is going to be picked up again. Nothing goes nowhere. It feels more like composing a piece of music than writing a book in a modern sense of writing a book. And Tolkien is good at composing that kind of story. All right, another thing that I want to talk about. Within fantasy, we have a problem. We have like one of these things is that trope of the golden age. It's like everything's been great once ago, like once upon a time in the past. Everything was great and glorious, and people knew way more magic, and people were way more powerful. Everything was a fucking amazing. And now we're just scrabbling in the ruins, trying to keep alive and keep things going. It's something that you find both in mythology and in history and religion. It's like we have that golden age in Christianity. It's like, yeah, we were on the paradise in paradise. We were like, everyone was naked, everyone was not eating apples. We were happy. And then we just, doesn't make any sense. Like the idea of golden ages, you have it in Greek mythology with the golden age and the bronze age, like the iron age and all that. It's a golden age and a silver age. But it's very much rooted in like it's very much in all of like not all but a lot of like human like mythology and human psyche. The idea that at some mythic point in the past everything was so much better than it is now, because the fact is like life always stinks. We're never really happy. We all think like things could be better. Things could be better because yeah, life sucks most of the time. And I have no problem with that. And I do have a problem with the idea of that golden era that cannot be reached again, and the idea of that we're all like on a huge decline from that golden era to whenever, and things can only get worse. And Lord of the Rings at the beginning feels like that, because obviously you have that like age of the Silmarillion, you have that age of Numenor, and when you start reading Lord of the Rings, a lot of it is like in decay, right? Like everyone's like, things were better in the old day. Gondor was bigger. Honor was actually existing, and everything is in ruins. It's fucked. But at the end, it's like, yeah, what happens now is there will be a new golden age. We'll start it all up again. It's going to be the age of humans, like the beginning of the fourth age. And things will be glorious. We're going to resettle all the wastelands. And I feel that's something that, like a lot of fantasy stories that sort of get inspired by Lord of the Rings, kind of miss, is that it ends bittersweet, I guess. It ends bittersweet. The idea is like there will be a new golden age. Things will be great again. People will be happy. The evil has been defeated. All of that, but it obviously comes at a cost. It comes at a personal cost. We see that with Frodo. It also comes at a general cost, because some things have lived past their day. The idea of like magic is fading. the elves are going to leave. All of those things are like parts that made the last age great in its way. Those things have to, move away to make room for the new golden age and the new great age. But it's the thing that I guess a lot of us like oftentimes overlook when we're talking about fantasy, when we're talking about Lord of the Rings in particular, is that nowhere is it said that like the fourth age will be worse than the third age. No, it will probably be better than the third age. It's just that some things that were good in the third age have to move aside. And that's something that we can take away from it for like our days. Like, times are changing all the time. That's how the world works, that's how history works. And sometimes things that were comfortable for us or that we romanticize in a way that by that had a huge part in our like perception of the world, but sometimes those things still are tarnished by realizing that there was something wrong in there and that we need to, move them out of the focus, so to speak, and send them to the west in a way. And I feel it's something that we often overlook, that because the Lord of the Rings, while it ends sad, and we're going to come to that in a minute, it also ends on a positive note because things are looking up, things are going to get better, things are going to get as good as possible, and that's cool. And that's one thing that a lot of like fantasy that followed in the footsteps of Tolkien never actually got to, because like even once the evil was defeated, it never ends like things are going to be great now. So I feel like Lord of the Rings, for not following that idea of like everything was better in the past, is like to be commended in a way. Now we come to the Scouring of the Shire. And there's two things that are going on there. And I feel they're both important. The one side is the sad side, the Frodo side, right? The idea that sometimes you go and do something great, you come back, and you can't actually come back. You can't actually come home, and things will never be the same, because while you went out to defend what you believed in, what was important to you, in the process of fighting for that, you spent so much of yourself, you lost so much of yourself, that you can never come back to that, that innocence in a way. And it's sort of a loss of innocence story. There's like you go from that happy thing, and society moves on, but you as a person have lost too much to ever fully come back. And that's certainly something that, even though Tolkien is always like, this is not an allegory on whatever, but the point is, a lot of people that went into war, whatever kind of war, and fighting for the right side, you take away wounds that you can't heal forever, that you can't fully heal. That's never going to happen. Some people will not be able to actually get all of that, to actually lose all of that and enjoy the victory they fought for. That's never gonna happen. So you have that aspect with Frodo, and I fully I sympathize with him a lot. The other side, though, is I feel also very important. It's not so much what happens during the Scouring of the Shire, it's more what happens shortly before that, when you have Gandalf, when he's like, you're all grown up now. And that's another thing there, that is like we tend to, as people who live in a lot of safety, at least people like in Europe, when I say we right now, I'm speaking about people like me in a highly privileged Western society. It's like we are pretty much as children, because we can very much ignore all the hardships of the world out there. And there's always people out there that kind of protect us. There's always those rangers and what you want to call them. That stuff is always out there. And in the positive side, it's like people that are fighting for us, and the negative side, it's the way we actually prevent all the people that actually suffer out there from coming to us, which is, at least for Europe, the bigger problem right now. Because I will never, I don't want to call Hungary the Rangers. I want to call them fascists, but that's a different thing. Point is, it's very easy to forget all of like the privileges that we have, and the idea that people like you know Merry and Pippin and Sam, mostly Merry and Pippin, actually by going out there grew up in a way, and it's very very obvious in the way it's written, right? You have Merry meeting with Theoden, and him like a father you shall be to me. It's like you have all of that. It's like Merry comes of age on like a whole other level, and so he realizes that there, freedom needs some kind of like active, needs some kind of action to actually get full freedom, right? He understands that, and on the other hand, Pippin also, through his service in Minas Tirith and in the final battle and all that, he also gets that. I feel especially with Merry and Pippin, you see that process of growing up in a more like realistic way, because obviously Sam and Frodo are in extreme circumstances all the time, so it's kind of unfair to look at that. But Merry and Pippin have grown up and are able to take responsibility, and when you come back to the Scouring of the Shire, you have that picture of people that are living in, have always lived in peace, and have not have no understanding of what it means to fight for like privileges and freedom, because I've never done it. And just to make this clear, like I'm not saying right now that we as people in the West or wherever are living are being threatened by anything or whatever. The point is, though, to understand the freedom and privileges that we have, and be aware of the fact that in the end it's either those are either like bestowed on us by outside forces most of the time, or they are won by us by doing something for it, and that we should be aware of that. And I feel that's sort of one of the things of the Scouring of the Shire, is that even while you're going away and doing your growing up, you come back, you still have some responsibility for your community. Like each and every one of us has a responsibility for our community, and to never just follow orders because they're orders. Just like question them, make sure they're the right ones. By which I mean get vaccinated, because those are orders. Those that are the right ones. They're not even orders. So anyway, my point being, the Scouring of the Shire is, I feel, an essential part of the Lord of the Rings. Like you have all these like different endings, like dropping their ring in the volcano. Awesome. Aragorn being crowned king. Fucking awesome. Theoden being buried. Another ending that's glorious. Them coming back to Rivendell, talking to, and that's so powerful. Like, whatever happened to that ring of mine, Frodo? Frodo's like, I lost it. That's so powerful. Anyway, all of that. All of that is important, but that point where you come back to the place you actually went away to fight for, and you come back and realize that the people left back home maybe don't appreciate what you did, and need need teaching in a way to understand that. That's like a call for each and every one of us who live in these privileged places to also, like, maybe wake up enough to realize that situation and appreciate what how many people suffer for the privileges that we have. So yeah, there's that. Plus, obviously, the absolute ending with. And I just read that like, I don't know, half an hour ago at this point. At that moment when they go to the Grey Havens and Frodo goes on the boat together with, like, on the Grey ship together with Gandalf and Galadriel and Elrond and Bilbo and all these others. And there's one thing that I feel is super important that's so close to the end. It's Gandalf talking to Sam and Merry and Pippin. It's like, I will not say, weep not, for not all tears are in vain. That's, yeah, of course I cry every time while reading Lord of the Rings. There's like so many points where I cried while reading Lord of the Rings, whether it's the end or it's like Theoden's death or Theoden's burial. All these places, I cry every time. But for something written in the 1950s, like 1940s, actually, the point where it's like, yeah, not all tears are in vain. Sometimes crying is okay. Spoken by someone like Gandalf, who is the ultimate hero of the story, or like the ultimate good guy. It's like, yeah, accept that. Like, sometimes tears are a natural response. Do that. I feel is a very, very powerful ending to that. There's so much more to talk about, like Frodo's compassion towards Saruman. I'm gonna keep that for like an overall like compassion video, maybe with Malazan at some point. We'll see. Anyway, point being, I've read Lord of the Rings, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 20 times by now, and it moves me every single time because there's so much in there that you can take away from it every single time. And these are just the things that, like, I stuck out to me this time around, and I'm certainly gonna read it again next year, so I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you took something away from it, and I'll talk to you tomorrow about something else. Until then, cheers.